Despite what the general public may believe, not all gamers sit like zombies in front of their TV screens for hours a day, rotting their minds with senseless gaming. In fact, like many, I would argue that there are in fact many games which can really get your grey matter working overtime, and take some great intelligence to work your way through. This has always been the case, and the Nintendo 64 library also throws up some interesting titles which would appeal to those who are more interested in a mental workout than a physical one. And so for today's topic, we're looking at my selection of N64 games which are suited to those of you watching who prefer some cranial challenges. As always, if you like the look of any of these games, I'll place links below to some of the full reviews to help you decide if they really are worth spending your time on. Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber, is a fantastic entry into the Ogre Battle saga, and the amount of depth in its campaign is staggering. As a real-time tactical role-playing game, you naturally get a whole ton of character development, and the story here covers classism, religion, moral judgments, and more politics than Donald Trump and Theresa May combined. Whilst at first glance the storyline and real-time tactical elements may be what you feel gives the game its great depth, it's actually the unit formation where the game really shines. You command a battalion of up to 50 troops, and these are broken down into smaller units. Learning how to equip your units as well as how to structure them into a formidable fighting force is where the game really shines, and I'd argue that you're likely to spend more time here than in battle, as you make tweaks and changes to your loadouts to make them as effective as possible. The game was critically reviewed, has become a sleeper hit on the console, and I urge you strongly to check this game out. It's not for a casual gamer fan, but for those who give it the time to develop, it turns into one of the console's strongest experiences by the time the credits roll. Charlie Blast Territory may have one of the most generic and dullest sounding titles of any video game ever made, and that's perhaps why it was so overlooked on its release. As an original PlayStation title under the name The Bombing Islands, there are some differences between the titles, but the core gameplay is pretty much intact. You'll play as Charlie, who is a demolition expert, and your job is to solve puzzles to help him clear the 6 rivers which have been blocked by the King of Industry. Now don't let the generic storyline, below par visuals and fiddly controls put you off, as the gameplay is anything but dull. As the game progresses, the puzzles become increasingly more difficult, which require not only a well thought out plan to set off the charges, but an escape plan to ensure that you aren't caught up in the blast zone. Throw in a range of different bombs and items, and some basic movement that you'll need, and you have a game which is a bit of a slow burner, but it really ramps up its challenge in the later levels. Command & Conquer is a 1999 release coming from Looking Glass Studios and published by Nintendo on the N64. As a critically acclaimed real-time strategy game, I was thrilled to see this one show up on the console, but the PC will always be the best way to play this series. To get the game to fit on a cart, there are many compromises, but the core gameplay is intact here, and both the story and strategy elements are nicely adapted to work as best as possible on console form. As a huge Age of Empires fan on my PC back in the day, it was always cool to be able to jump onto a console and play this real-time strategy game, and it's one of the more memorable ones around. The FMV is gone and instead replaced by static text screens, but the same resource management you know and love is still a requirement of the game. The terrain, vehicles and buildings have all been upgraded to 3D, and so the visuals are a nice step up from anyone expecting 2D sprites. The biggest downfalls are that the frame rate isn't always consistent enough, and I would have loved the N64 mouse to have been made available as an input device, but the controller does a great job of making the game accessible to the masses. This is one I would also recommend adding to your collections, as it's fairly easy to pick up and find. Whilst not being the biggest Dr. Mario fan myself, I can see why the series made an entry on the Nintendo 64. Developed and published by Nintendo in 2001, Dr. Mario takes everything you know and love about previous Dr. Mario games and does very little to change it. Now that's not a bad thing, because at its heart it's more or less of the same type of experience. Where the game really shines though is its 4-player support, and so playing this against friends makes it instantly more fun. As a single player experience, you have a fairly run-of-the-mill story mode which is about as generic as they come, But if anything, it almost seems like an extended tutorial, as multiplayer really was the heart of the game. It's essentially a variation of a block falling puzzle game, which I think most people can pick up and play and enjoy. But those willing to spend time with it will find some tricky puzzles, cool game modes like time challenges, and an addictive marathon mode to really rack up those high scores. Retaining the mechanics of the original Lode Runner, but giving it a 3D twist, made this one of the retro remakes for the Nintendo 64, which balanced perfectly, appealing to those fans of the original game, whilst also breathing new life into the gameplay experience. You'll run around the 3D environments collecting gold, using your mental metal to dodge enemies, and mastering the few power-ups and special items which will aid you in your quest. There's nothing more satisfying than getting killed on a level due to mistakes in your strategy, and then having that eureka moment and your well-timed plan finally paying off. The game gets progressively harder as it goes on, but there's a ton of levels here to ease you into the game, and I feel that new control and strategy elements you'll need to master are generally eased into the difficulty level. As a puzzle game at its core, it's one of those games that would have had a small audience in its heyday. After all, this is a genre that still often struggles against AAA titles even to this day. But when the controls are so good, the visuals are acceptable, and the quality of puzzles in the game are so good, this is one which I feel everyone should at least give some time to. If the game hasn't quite gripped you after the first world, then it probably never will, but I bet that you get that one more try feel when playing the game quite quickly. It's dirt cheap to pick up, and it's a great trap 'em style game. This is one which will appeal to those of you who like strategy based puzzles with some good trial and error moments thrown in. Starcraft 64 is another PC to Nintendo 64 real-time strategy game which packs in a huge amount of content. Whereas Command & Conquer removed the full motion video, Starcraft 64 is perhaps best remembered by those who were in awe of the huge amount of full motion video that the game cart contained. Throw into that the game elements from Brood War's expansion pack, and it is perhaps the best real-time strategy experience on N64, albeit there's not really much competition. The game packs a challenge in a sense that you have different races to master, and also the ability to play with a friend. Many would agree that perhaps the strongest point of StarCraft on PC back in the day was the ability to play online against other players, which is where the real fun took place. And so the console's lack of online play certainly limits this experience. If you have a friend, however, who is skilled in the game, then going head to head can make this a game which can still be enjoyed competitively even to this day. The downside is that you'll have full visibility of what they are doing, and so that both helps to create a tactful gameplay experience, but also takes away surprise attack elements. Again, this one lacks the mouse support, which really would have made the game easy to handle, but the controls do perhaps the best job possible of giving you quick access to everything you need to start building and battling. With expansion pack support, the visuals are a notch above Command & Conquer, but the frame rate in the peak of battle will make this unplayable for PC purists. It commands a high price these days, but with some solid AI and the multiplayer mode, I really think this is a great game for anyone wanting to delve into RTS games, perhaps even as their first entry into this type of experience. If you enjoy it, then there's a plethora of similar games on computers which would be your next logical step. Virtual Chess 64 was developed and published by Titus. Now for many of you, that's perhaps all that you'll need to hear to quickly decide that the game is not going to be any good, but in this instance that's perhaps a little bit premature. Although most remembered for the animated scenes which are triggered when a piece is taken, it's under the hood that the game really stood out. The AI in the game is quite honestly brilliant. So good in fact that it won the 1996 and 1997 World Microcomputer Chess Championship in the professional category. Also include the 96 Harvard Cup win and the game's brilliant tutorial which can turn even a newbie into a competent player, and you have a chess game that's about as good as it comes on home consoles. You can also turn the 3D animations off for anyone wanting a more classical 2D experience. Saying that though, chess games are a hard sell, and coming from Titus, this game really didn't do itself any favours in that regard. But again, highlighting the AI, this game is a game which you can spend countless hours on and will always find a challenge, even if you become a chess master. Wheel of Fortune takes us from genius levels to that of a casual general knowledge fan, and as a hugely popular TV show takes its bow on the system from game tech. Spin the wheel, choose your letters, and try to solve one of the 4,000 word puzzles the game contains to win virtual cash prizes. Okay, so this one's never going to replicate the thrill that it must have been to actually play the game for real on the TV show. But the reward the game offers is your ability to show off your knowledge on a range of different subjects. Saying that though, this is based off the American version of the TV show, and there are a lot of country specific questions which those outside North America may struggle with. The visuals are average at best, but the addition of FMV sequences was a rarity for its time, and I think the overall television style presentation works fairly well and it helps capture the feel and essence of the source in a way. I enjoy this game from time to time, but it's one which I feel can only be played in small doses before the feel good factor starts to wear thin. It's cheap to pick up and so it's worth pretty much everybody picking this up for a few dollars and being in anyone's collection, even if it's just for the nostalgic factor. Jeopardy is another Nintendo 64 game which takes a TV show and brings it to our beloved Nintendo boxes. This game on the other hand offers a much greater challenge than Wheel of Fortune, with some really tough questions and categories which will leave you scratching your head. Again, there's around 4,000 question and answers in the game, and you have the FMV sequences to transfer over the feel-good show of the show to the console. The game suffers from the same North American specific question set, and so topics like the Civil War may be history level knowledge for Americans, but many of us the other side of the pond or elsewhere in the world may really struggle with the high difficulty the game poses overall with some of these questions. On a plus note, this one's also cheap as chips to own. With multiplayer mode included, it's one which you could quite easily use to show off your general knowledge when playing with friends. Perhaps the worst part about GameTech spending time working on these TV show titles was it meant that the Robotech N64 game never wound up getting completed. And so there you have it, my roundup of the N64 games which I feel will take you to war with their mentally stimulating and challenging environments. For today's topic of conversation, I'd love to know of any other games, not just on the N64, which you really feel pack more of a mental challenge than one which requires lightning fast finger movements. I also love point and click adventures like Broken Sword and Full Throttle, and I often feel that finally figuring out a tricky puzzle or solving a complex problem is one of the most enjoyable parts of video games. It's just a shame these days that many games often have more of a fastest finger first challenge than a mental one, but what do you think? Sound off in the comment section down below, and until next time.